What if the missing piece in your diabetes management, the reason your A1C isn't reflecting the discipline you bring to every other aspect of your health, isn't what you're eating, isn't how much you're moving? What if it's what's happening while you sleep? The research is clear. Getting too little or too much sleep produces glucose dysregulation that your medication, your diet, and your exercise routine cannot fully compensate for. And almost nobody managing diabetes has ever been told this. I know what you're thinking. Dr. Griffin, my doctor manages my diabetes with medication and diet. Nobody has ever mentioned sleep as a clinical variable. I understand exactly why that feels reasonable. Sleep doesn't appear on the standard diabetes management checklist. It doesn't come up in the standard A1C conversation. And yet the research connecting sleep duration and quality to blood sugar regulation in adults over 60 is more substantial, more consistent, P5 and more clinically actionable than the silence around it would ever suggest. I'm Dr. Raymond Griffin. 25 years in internal medicine, metabolic health in older adults. In that time, the sleep-glucose connection has been one of the most consistently undelivered conversations I encounter in seniors managing diabetes. Not because the evidence is absent, because the appointment is 15 minutes and this conversation is longer than 15 minutes. Today I'm going to have it with you in full. Let me show you what is actually happening inside your body during sleep that makes it so directly, so powerfully, relevant to blood sugar. Management in adults over 60 with diabetes. Most seniors managing diabetes know the standard variables. Carbohydrate intake, medication timing, P5 physical activity, all real, all genuinely important. But none of them account for what happens during the hours when the body is horizontal, and the metabolic maintenance work that waking activity cannot perform begins. Here's what is actually happening. Sleep is not metabolic rest, it is metabolic work. Specific, critical work with direct consequences for insulin sensitivity, glucose regulation, and the hormonal environment that determines how effectively your cells respond to insulin the following day. During deep slow-wave sleep, your body performs two processes directly relevant to blood sugar management. First, growth hormone release. The majority of your daily growth hormone is secreted during deep sleep. It regulates glucose metabolism, promotes insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue, and supports the cellular repair that keeps metabolic function efficient. When deep sleep is insufficient, growth hormone drops, insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue declines. And the glucose that should be absorbed efficiently by muscle cells remains in the bloodstream instead. Second, cortisol decline. The stress hormone cortisol follows its natural overnight decline, reaching its lowest point during deep sleep before rising gradually to support. Waking alertness. When sleep is disrupted or insufficient, cortisol does not decline adequately. Elevated overnight cortisol directly stimulates glucose production by the liver, raising fasting blood sugar independently of anything you ate the day before. Think of deep sleep like a nightly recalibration of your entire metabolic system. When the recalibration is incomplete, too short, too disrupted, too shallow, the system operates the following day on settings that were never properly reset. And the glucose numbers reflect that every single morning. So now you understand what is actually happening. Growth hormone secretion, supporting insulin sensitivity. Cortisol decline, preventing overnight glucose production. Metabolic recalibration that incomplete sleep leaves unfinished every single night. The next question is the one that changes the trajectory. What is the optimal sleep duration for seniors with diabetes? And what is the mistake that keeps most seniors either undersleeping or oversleeping, compounding the metabolic dysregulation their diabetes? Management is working to correct. Here is the mistake. Hear this clearly. The mistake is treating sleep as a comfort variable rather than a metabolic intervention. Almost every senior with diabetes who comes into my office has never once had a conversation about sleep duration and quality as a clinical component of glucose management. Sleep is discussed in the context of feeling rested, never in the context of A1C, never in the context of fasting glucose. Never as a variable that, when optimized, produces measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity that dietary changes and medication adjustments alone cannot fully replicate. And critically, the research shows that both too little and too much sleep independently worsen glucose regulation in older adults with diabetes. The relationship is U-shaped. Under 6 hours produces cortisol elevation and insulin resistance. specific sleep optimization framework that targets the precise duration, architecture, and timing research confirms produces the best glucose outcomes. I call it the R.E.S.T method. R. Reset the sleep-wake timing. E. Extend deep sleep architecture. S. Suppress overnight cortisol elevation. Time the protocol precisely. 4 mechanisms. 1 framework. The metabolic conversation your diabetes management has been missing. Here is the R.E.S.T method exactly as I teach it to my diabetic patients over 60. Specific actions, specific timing, every detail that makes the difference between understanding the sleep-glucose connection and actually changing what your glucose numbers look like. Every morning. Step 1. Reset the sleep-wake timing. Same bedtime, same wake time, 7 days a week, including weekends. The target sleep window for adults over 60 with diabetes, based on the research producing the best glucose outcomes, is 7 to 8 hours. Not 6, not 9, 7 to 8. Set your bedtime to achieve exactly that window. Do not vary it by more than 30 minutes in either direction on any night. Step 2. Extend deep sleep architecture. 5. Bedroom temperature between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. This single environmental change extends slow-wave sleep duration, the stage where growth hormone peaks and insulin sensitivity is restored, by a 5. Measurable margin that shows up in next morning fasting glucose readings within 1 week of consistent implementation. Step 3. Suppress overnight cortisol elevation. 30 minutes before bed, no screens, no news, no stimulating conversation. 5. Blue light suppresses melatonin production and elevates cortisol during precisely the window when cortisol should be declining most rapidly. The 5. Replace screens with 5 minutes of slow diaphragmatic breathing. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system and accelerates the cortisol decline that protects overnight glucose stability. Step 4. Time the protocol precisely. Last meal minimum 3 hours before bed. Diabetes medication, reviewed with your physician specifically for optimal nighttime dosing. And a consistent pre-sleep glucose check, establishing your baseline before the R.E.S.T protocol begins so you can measure exactly what it produces. Let me tell you about Gerald, 71 years old, retired high school principal, organized, methodical, and genuinely committed to managing his type 2 diabetes with the same administrative discipline he had once applied to running a school of 500 students. He tracked his carbohydrates, walked 45 minutes every morning without exception, took his medication faithfully and attended every quarterly appointment, and his A1C had not moved meaningfully in 2 years. He sat across from me with the particular frustration of someone who has been doing everything correctly, by every standard available to him, and whose numbers have refused to reflect the effort. Dr. Griffin. He's say 9 hours produces inflammatory changes and metabolic sluggishness that impair glucose clearance. The optimal window is specific, and most seniors are outside it without knowing it. After 25 years of connecting sleep to metabolic outcomes in diabetic patients, I developed. I am doing everything my doctor told me. Why isn't it working? Before I adjusted anything, I asked him one question that no previous appointment had ever asked. Pi 5, how many hours are you sleeping? And what time are you going to bed and waking up? He slept 5 to 6 hours on weekdays and compensated with 8 to 9 hours on weekends. His bedtime varied by up to 2 hours depending on the evening. His bedroom television stayed on until he fell asleep. His last meal was typically within 90 minutes of bed. His sleep architecture was fragmented. His circadian rhythm was completely inconsistent. His cortisol was never declining adequately overnight. And his growth hormone secretion, the primary overnight driver of the insulin sensitivity his morning glucose numbers depended on, was operating at a fraction of its potential every single night. We implemented the R.E.S.T method without changing a single other variable in his regimen. 6 weeks later, his fasting glucose had dropped an average of 18 points. At his next quarterly appointment, his A1C had moved for the first time in 2 years. He looked at me and said, "Nobody ever asked me about sleep before. Now let's talk honestly about what to expect. Because Gerald's fasting glucose dropped 18 points at 6 weeks, and I don't want you abandoning the R.E.S.T method at day 10 because your morning numbers haven't moved as dramatically as you were hoping. Circadian rhythm restoration and sleep architecture improvement are gradual biological processes. The metabolic consequences of years of inconsistent sleep timing do not reverse in 3 nights. They reverse on a timeline that rewards consistency, not intensity. Here is the real timeline. Week 1. The most noticeable early change is not glucose, it is sleep onset. Most patients report falling asleep more consistently and waking less frequently within the first 5 to 7 days of circadian consistency. 5. Cortisol decline is becoming more reliable. Growth hormone secretion is beginning to normalize. These changes are not yet visible in your glucose numbers, but they are the foundation everything else is built upon, weeks 2 to 3. Fasting glucose readings begin reflecting improved overnight cortisol suppression. The liver is receiving a cleaner hormonal signal, producing less glucose independently during the overnight fasting window. Morning numbers begin trending downward consistently rather than fluctuating unpredictably, weeks 4 to 6. The cumulative effect of restored growth hormone secretion begins producing measurable improvements in daytime insulin sensitivity. Post-meal glucose responses improve. The full metabolic picture begins shifting in the direction that Gerald's 6-week follow-up confirmed. Now, let me be absolutely clear. Genuine medical guidance, not a legal formality, the R.E.S.T. method is not a replacement for diabetes medication or medical supervision. Improving sleep quality can shift your glucose numbers significantly, meaning your current dosage may require adjustment. Inform your physician when implementing this protocol. Monitor your glucose more frequently during the first 2 weeks. Changes that improve metabolic function require medical awareness to remain safe. I want to challenge you personally, not a vague encouragement to sleep better. A specific, concrete, 21-day challenge with 4 defined daily actions, 2 measurements, and an honest way to evaluate whether the R.E.S.T. method is producing the metabolic shift it produced for Gerald without changing a single other variable in your diabetes management. Here is exactly what I am asking you to do. For the next 21 days, every single day, without exception, implement all 4 steps with complete consistency. Fixed bedtime and wake time targeting 7 to 8 hours. Same time every night, including weekends. 5. Bedroom temperature between 65 and 68 degrees. No screens for 30 minutes before bed, replaced with 5 minutes of slow diaphragmatic breathing, 4 counts in, 6 counts out. Last meal completed minimum 3 hours before your fixed bedtime. 4 actions. No purchase required, no prescription required. Nothing taking more than 5 minutes to implement beyond the sleep window itself. Track 2 things. First, your fasting glucose every morning before medication or food. 1 number, written down daily without exception. 2nd, your sleep restoration score. Each morning rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how rested you feel upon waking. 1 number, daily. At the end of 21 days, compare your first week fasting glucose average to your 3rd week average. Compare your first week restoration scores to your 3rd week scores. Let the biology speak for itself. Now, if you watch this entire video, go to the comment section right now and type the words R.E.S.T. I read every single comment, every one. Without exception, type R.E.S.T. right now, and tell me, what is your average fasting glucose reading right now? I want to know your starting point. I want to be honest with you about something. Gerald tracked his carbohydrates for 2 years. Walked 45 minutes every morning for 2 years. Took every medication on schedule for 2 years. And his A1C did not move because the metabolic recalibration that sleep performs every night was never happening completely enough to allow everything else he was doing to produce its full effect. He was not failing. He was working without one of the most fundamental tools his metabolism needed. And nobody, not in 2 years of quarterly appointments, had ever identified that the tool was missing. You now have that tool, the optimal sleep window. The 4 specific actions that restore the hormonal environment your glucose management depends on overnight. The complete metabolic conversation that Gerald's appointments never delivered. 1 action tonight. Just 1. The 5, set your alarm for the same time tomorrow morning that you will set it every morning for the next 21 days. Same time, non-negotiable. That single act of circadian commitment is where the R.E.S.T. method begins. 1 alarm. Tonight, that is where Gerald's A1C finally started moving. 5, yours can start moving tonight. Before you close this video, think about someone specific. A spouse managing diabetes whose A1C has not moved despite genuine dietary discipline. A sibling who takes every medication faithfully and cannot understand why their numbers keep fluctuating. A close friend exhausted by the effort of managing diabetes carefully and still not seeing the results that effort deserves. The sleep-glucose connection is one of the most consistently undelivered conversations in diabetes management. Not because the evidence is absent. Point 5. Because the appointment is 15 minutes, and this conversation is longer than 15 minutes. Share this video on Facebook right now. N95 tag them directly. Tell them you watched this and thought of them. Tell them 21 days and 2 daily measurements is all it takes to find out whether the missing variable in their diabetes management has been happening every night while they sleep, because for Gerald, identifying that missing variable changed 2 years of stalled progress in 6 weeks. The 5 tag them before you close this video. Subscribe now for more conversations like this one, the metabolic conversations most appointments never deliver, every single week on this channel. I'm Dr. Raymond Griffin. Sleep well, manage well, and take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.